The wards protecting Hogwarts did not break with a loud crash or a flash of green light. They died like a sick animal. It began on a Tuesday evening in the Great Hall. The floating candles that usually lit the room flickered and turned a deep, bruised purple. The enchanted ceiling, which was supposed to show a clear starry night, began to peel away like old skin. Behind the stars, the sky was not black. It was a churning red storm. Ash began to fall from the high arches. It fell into the pumpkin juice and onto the plates of roast chicken. The noise in the hall stopped instantly. Hundreds of students looked up. The air suddenly grew cold, but it was not the cold of a dementor. It felt sticky and wrong. It smelled like sulfur and rotting earth. Albus Dumbledore stood up from the high table. His face was pale. He raised the Elder Wand to cast a simple, revealing charm. But for the first time in a century, the wand did not obey him. The wood of the wand trembled in his hand. The magic of the castle was not being attacked. It was being infected. A low humming sound started to vibrate through the stone floor. It sounded like a wet, heavy breathing. The giant hourglasses that held the house points suddenly shattered. The rubies for Gryffindor and the emeralds for Slytherin did not fall to the floor as gems. They turned into black spiders and beetles as they hit the ground. Screams erupted from the Hufflepuff table as the insects began to crawl over their shoes. Dumbledore shouted for the prefects to lead the students out, but his voice did not echo. The sound was swallowed by the thick air. Then the first victim began to float. It was not a student. It was the ghost of nearly headless Nick. The pearl-white spirit drifted upward, but he was not moving under his own power. He looked terrified. His ghostly form began to crack. Bright red veins appeared on his transparent neck. He opened his mouth to scream, but only the sound of a grandfather clock chiming came out. It rang once, then twice, then 3 times. On the 4th chime, the ghost imploded. He was crushed into a tiny ball of silver light, and then vanished into the red storm above. Panic took over. Students rushed for the heavy oak doors, but the wood had warped. Black vines, thick as a human leg, were growing rapidly over the exits. They pulsed with a sick life. The vines squeezed the door handles until the metal snapped. Snape drew his wand and fired a cutting curse at the vines. The magic hit the plant, but instead of slicing it, the spell was absorbed. The vine grew larger, feeding on the energy of the wizard's attack. The castle shook violently. The portraits on the wall stopped moving. The people in the paintings froze in horror, their eyes bleeding black oil. In the center of the hall, the stone floor cracked open. A red fog poured out. Inside the fog, a voice spoke. It did not speak out loud. It spoke inside the minds of every person in the room. It whispered to them about their worst memories and their deepest shame. Harry Potter grabbed his scar, falling to his knees as a headache split his skull. He did not see Voldemort. He saw a house with a blue door and a clock that never stopped ticking. The reality of the wizarding world was bending. The laws of magic were being rewritten by a power that did not ask permission. The invasion had finished before anyone knew it had started. Hogwarts was no longer a school. It was a feeding ground. The panic in the Great Hall did not stop. It grew heavier. The black vines on the doors were not just plants. They were muscles. They pulsed with a heartbeat that was slow and wet. Severus Snape stepped forward. He did not look afraid. He looked angry. He raised his wand again. He did not use a cutting spell this time. He summoned fire. A jet of orange flame shot from his wand. It hit the thickest vine. The vine screamed. It was a high and terrible sound like a wounded dog. The plant recoiled, but it did not burn to ash. It released a cloud of black spores. The spores drifted toward the nearest table. It was the Ravenclaw table, A fifth-year student inhaled the dust. She choked. Her eyes rolled back in her head. She fell onto the stone floor and began to convulse. Her skin turned grey very fast. Dumbledore saw this. He knew they could not stay in the hall. The air was becoming poisonous. The headmaster raised the Elder Wand high above his head. He did not aim at the doors. He aimed at the enchanted ceiling. He shouted a spell that sounded like a cannon blast. The magic hit the storm of red clouds above them. For a second, the red clouds parted. The real sky was visible. Then the magic shattered the stone roof itself. Huge blocks of rock fell down, but Dumbledore stopped them in mid-air with a wave of his hand. He made the rocks float to the side. He had created a hole in the roof. He shouted for the students to fly. He commanded everyone to summon their brooms. But the brooms did not come. The summoning charm failed. The air was too thick with the foreign energy. The magic could not travel through the red fog. They were trapped on the ground. McGonagall ran to the students. She told them to form lines, but the lines broke instantly. The floor of the great hall began to turn soft. The stone melted into a sticky black mud. Something was moving under the mud. Hands reached out of the ground. They were not human hands. They were long and pale with sharp claws. They grabbed the ankles of the students. Harry Potter pulled his wand out. He tried to help a first-year student who was crying. A hand had grabbed the boy's leg. Harry yelled a stunning spell. Red light hit the pale hand. The hand flinched and let go. Harry pulled the boy up. He looked around for Ron and Hermione. He saw them near the staff table. Hermione was casting a shield charm. A blue dome of light covered a small group of Gryffindors. The black mud was hissing against the blue light. The shield was cracking. Vecna did not show himself yet. He did not need to. He was in the walls. He was in the floor. He was in their heads. Harry heard the clock chime again. Bong, bong, bong. It was louder this time. He felt a cold presence walking through his mind. It was looking for something. It was looking for pain. It ignored the brave thoughts. It went straight to the memories of lonely cupboards and dead parents. Harry screamed as a vision flashed in his eyes. He saw the great hall, but it was dead. He saw skeletons sitting at the tables. He saw himself hanging from the ceiling by vines. Dumbledore realized that defensive magic was useless because the attack was not coming from the outside. The attack was rewriting the reality of the room. He changed his strategy. He did not try to block the vines. He tried to change the environment. He transfigured the black mud into glass. The floor hardened instantly. The pale hands were trapped under the clear surface. The students stopped sinking. Dumbledore pointed his wand at the heavy doors again. He did not try to open them. He blew them off their hinges. The explosion shook the whole castle. The wood splintered and the vines were torn apart. The exit was open. The crowd surged forward. They ran into the entrance hall. The marble staircase was waiting for them. But the entrance hall was wrong. The air was full of white flakes that looked like snow. But it was not cold. It was ash. The giant hourglasses were gone. In their place were large sacks of webbing that hung from the walls. The sacks were moving. Something was hatching inside them. The portraits on the grand staircase were screaming. The people in the paintings were being eaten by the canvas itself. The oil paint was melting and turning into black sludge. Filch, the caretaker, was standing at the bottom of the stairs. He was holding Mrs. Norris, his cat. He was staring at the front doors of the castle. The front doors were open. But outside, there was no Scotland. There was no lake. There was no moon. There was only a twisted red landscape. Lightning that was the color of dried blood flashed across the sky. Giant winged creatures flew in circles above the towers. They looked like bats, but they were the size of cars. Hagrid pushed through the crowd of students. He was huge and strong. He roared at the students to get up the stairs. He grabbed a stone statue of a gargoyle and threw it at a vine that was chasing them. The statue smashed the vine. Hagrid stood at the bottom of the stairs to block the way. He was a half-giant. His skin was tough. Spells usually bounced off him. But the vines were not using magic. They were physical. A vine wrapped around Hagrid's chest. It squeezed. Hagrid grunted. He pulled at the vine with his bare hands. He tore it in half. Green slime sprayed from the plant. Hagrid yelled for the teachers to get the children to the 7th floor. He knew the ground floor was lost. The students ran up the marble stairs. The stairs liked to change direction, but tonight they were moving wildly. They were swinging back and forth like broken bridges. A group of Ravenclaws jumped onto a landing just before their staircase fell away into the dark void below. The castle was groaning. The magic that held Hogwarts together was fighting against a virus from the other dimension. The stone walls were bleeding. Thick red liquid oozed from the cracks between the bricks. In the confusion, Draco Malfoy was separated from his friends. He was pushed into a corridor on the 2nd floor. He was alone. The torches on the walls had gone out. The only light came from the red lightning outside the windows. Draco held his wand with a shaking hand. He heard a wet noise behind him. He turned around. A dog was standing there, but it was not a dog. It had no face. Its head opened up like a flower made of teeth and muscle. It was a demodog. Draco cast a curse. He yelled a spell to cause pain. The magic hit the monster. The monster did not stop. It did not feel pain the way a human or an animal did. It pounced. Draco fell backward. He dropped his wand. He scrambled away on the floor. The monster roared. Its mouth opened wide to bite his face. Suddenly, a silver arrow hit the monster in the neck. The creature yelped and fell sideways. A centaur stood at the end of the hall. It was Firenze. He had galloped up the stairs. He fired another arrow. The arrow pierced the monster's heart. The beast stopped moving. Firenze grabbed Draco by the collar of his robes and dragged him toward the stairs. The centaur looked terrified. He told Draco that the stars had gone out. He said that Mars was not bright tonight, because Mars was gone. The sky was empty. On the 3rd floor, Hermione Granger dragged Ron Weasley into an empty classroom. She slammed the door and locked it with a spell. She breathed hard. She looked at Ron. Ron was pale. He was holding his arm. A vine had grazed him. The skin where the vine touched was burned black. It looked like frostbite. Hermione opened her bag. She pulled out a book on magical maladies. She flipped the pages frantically. She could not find anything about red storms or black vines. She told Ron that this was not Voldemort. Voldemort used fear, but he wanted a world to rule. This force did not want to rule. It wanted to consume. She said the physics of the castle were changing. The gravity felt lighter. The air had less oxygen. She said they needed to find a place that was highly magical to make a stand. The room of requirement was the best option. Ron asked about Harry. Hermione said Harry was with Dumbledore. She hoped he was safe. She looked out the window. The Quidditch pitch was burning. The wooden towers were on fire. The grass of the pitch was turning into a massive web. In the center of the web, a giant spider-like shape was forming. It was the Mind Flayer. It was pulling itself out of the ground. It was made of smoke and shadow. It was taller than the astronomy tower. Back in the main stairwell, the battle was getting worse. The teachers had formed a rear guard. Flitwick, Sprout, and McGonagall stood in a line on the 4th floor landing. They were firing spells down into the darkness. Flitwick was using charms to animate the suits of armor. The metal knights marched down the stairs to fight the demodogs. The sound of metal crunching against bone echoed in the hall. Sprout was throwing seeds that exploded into vines, trying to fight the black plants with magical plants. But the black vines were stronger. They ate the magical plants. They absorbed the green life and turned it grey. McGonagall transfigured the banisters into lions. The stone lions leaped into the horde of monsters. For a moment, it seemed like they might hold the line. But then the clock chimed again. Bong, 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 bong. The sound paralyzed everyone. It was not just a sound. It was a psychic shockwave. McGonagall froze. Her eyes went wide. She was not on the stairs anymore. In her mind, she was back in a moment of grief from her past. She saw her dead husband. He was standing in the shadows. He was calling to her. She lowered her wand. A demodog lunged at her. Snape appeared from the shadows. He did not use magic. He used a sword he had taken from a suit of armor. He cut the monster's head off. He grabbed McGonagall and shook her. He shouted at her to close her mind. He told her that the enemy was a Legilimens of a level they had never seen. He said the enemy was inside their thoughts. McGonagall gasped and woke up from the trance. She looked at Snape. She saw fear in his black eyes. Snape admitted that he could not block the voice. He was an expert at protecting his mind. But this voice did not knock on the door. It seeped under the crack. It was like water. It found every small hole in their mental defenses. Dumbledore led the main group of students to the 7th floor. He was moving slower now. The hand that held his wand was blackened. He had touched the red fog to test it. The curse was spreading up his arm. He ignored the pain. He stopped in front of the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy. He walked past it 3 times. He thought about a safe place. He thought about a fortress. The door to the room of requirement appeared. It was heavy iron. Dumbledore opened it. The room inside was massive. It was a cathedral of stone. It had beds, food, and water. It had high walls. Dumbledore ushered the students inside. Hundreds of terrified children ran into the sanctuary. Harry Potter stood by the door, waiting for his friends. He saw Hermione and Ron running down the hall. They made it inside. Dumbledore waited for the other teachers. Hagrid arrived, bleeding from a dozen cuts. Flitwick and Sprout came next. Snape and McGonagall were the last ones. They ran into the room. Dumbledore slammed the iron door shut. He placed his hand on the metal. He began to chant a complex spell. He was locking the room from the outside world. He was cutting it off from the rest of the castle. Inside the room of requirement, the noise of the battle faded. It was quiet. The students huddled together in groups. Some were crying. Some were staring at the walls in shock. The healers, Madame Pomfrey, and a few older students began to treat the wounded. But the wounds were strange. They refused to close with magic. The cuts oozed a black substance. Dumbledore walked to the center of the room. He looked old. He looked tired. He addressed the students. He told them the truth. He said that Hogwarts had been breached. He said that they were under siege. He said that the enemy was not a wizard. It was a lich from another reality. He told them that their wands would still work, but the rules of engagement had changed. They could not rely on the castle to protect them. The castle was now the enemy. Harry Potter sat in a corner with Ron and Hermione. Harry's head was pounding. The connection to Voldemort was usually a sharp pain. This was different. This was a dull, heavy pressure. He felt like he was underwater. He told his friends what he saw. He said he saw a man with skin like a burn victim. The man was sitting in a chair in the attic of a house. The man was plugged into the vines. He was controlling everything. Hermione asked if it was Voldemort. Harry said no. Voldemort was angry and arrogant. This man was cold. He was sad, but his sadness was dangerous. He wanted everyone else to be sad too. Harry said the man's name was Henry. Suddenly, the lights in the room of requirement flickered. A voice came out of the air. It was a deep, raspy voice. It did not speak in riddles. It spoke clearly. "Harry Potter," the voice whispered. Every head in the room turned to look at Harry. "You have forgotten," the voice said. "You think you are the hero, but you are just a boy who lived because others died." Your mother screamed. I heard her. It was a beautiful sound. Harry covered his ears. "Stop it," he yelled. "Open the door, Harry," the voice said. "Let me in. I can take the pain away. I can let you see them again. I can bring them back. Just open the door." Dumbledore stepped in front of Harry. He spoke to the empty air. He told the voice to leave. He declared that this sanctuary was protected by ancient laws. The voice laughed. It was a dry, cracking sound. "Laws," the voice mocked. "Your laws are for a broken world. I am the cure. I am the predator. You are the prey. Time is running out, old man." Tick, tock. The sound of the clock returned. It was deafening inside the room. Students screamed and covered their ears. Then silence. The presence withdrew. The pressure lifted. But the damage was done. They were safe for the moment, but they were trapped. Outside the room of requirement, the castle belonged to Vecna. The Great Hall was now a nest. The classrooms were hunting grounds. The library was a graveyard of forgotten knowledge. In the dungeons, the Slytherin common room had not been evacuated in time. The water from the Black Lake had smashed through the windows, but the water was gone. It had been replaced by the black sludge. The students who were trapped down there were not dead. They were being changed. They were being cocooned in the vines. Vecna was not just killing them. He was building an army. He needed soldiers who could use magic. He was turning the students into something new. Up in the headmaster's office, the portraits of the old headmasters were blank. The frames were empty. Fawkes the Phoenix sat on his perch. He looked sick. His feathers were falling out. He tried to burst into flame to be reborn, but the fire would not catch. He could not die. He could not be reborn. He was trapped in a cycle of decay. On the desk, Dumbledore's silver instruments were spinning wildly. They were emitting smoke. One by one, they exploded. The delicate mechanisms shattered. The monitoring system of the wizarding world were going dark. The Ministry of Magic would be trying to look in, but they would see nothing. Hogwarts had disappeared from the map. It was no longer in Scotland. It had been pulled halfway into the Upside Down. The moon outside the window was shattered. Debris from the broken moon floated in the red sky. The Mind Flayer stood over the castle. Its shadow fell across the towers. The particles of ash fell like snow. Harry looked at his friends. He realized something terrible. They were waiting for help, but help could not come. They could not send an owl. They could not use the flu network. They could not apparate. They were in a bottle, and Vecna had the cork. Ron looked at his wand. It was broken. He had snapped it when they were running. He threw the pieces on the floor. "What do we do?" he asked. His voice trembled. Hermione did not answer. She was looking at the students. She was counting them. She realized that almost a third of the school was missing. They were still out there. They were in the dark corridors. They were alone with the monsters. Dumbledore sat down heavily on a conjured chair. He looked at his blackened hand. The curse was moving faster now. It had reached his wrist. He knew he did not have much time. He looked at Snape. Snape nodded slightly. They shared a silent understanding. This was the end of the age of secrecy. This was the end of the game they had been playing with Voldemort. A new board had been set up, and on this board, the king was already in check. The first night of the siege began. There was no sunset. The red sky just grew slightly darker. The sounds of scratching on the heavy iron door began. Something was trying to get in. Something with claws. Harry closed his eyes. He tried to push the voice out of his head, but the clock kept ticking. It was the heartbeat of the new Hogwarts, and it would not stop until everyone was dead or taken. The breach was complete. The war for the mind had begun. The silence at the Ministry of Magic was heavier than the noise of any battle. In the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the enchanted maps that tracked magical activity across Great Britain had burned out. The section of the map that usually displayed Scotland was gone. It was not blank. It was charred, as if someone had held a cigarette lighter to the parchment until the paper curled and turned to ash. Cornelius Fudge stood in his pinstripe cloak, staring at the hole in the world. He was sweating. He spun the bowler hat in his hands until the brim began to fray. He looked at Rufus Scrimgeour. Scrimgeour did not look back. He was loading a bandolier of silver daggers. The head of the Aura office had the eyes of a lion that had smelled smoke. He knew that politics were over. This was a survival event. Scrimgeour mobilized the entire Aura department within the hour. They did not apparate directly into Hogwarts. The coordinates were invalid. Anyone who tried to teleport to the castle simply splinched, leaving half their body in London and the other half in a void of cold static. They aimed for Hogsmeade instead. A battalion of 50 elite wizards and witches materialized on the platform of the Hogsmeade train station. The air was the first warning. It was not the crisp Highland air. It was stagnant and filled with white particles that drifted like snow but tasted like copper. The station was abandoned. The Hogwarts Express sat on the tracks, but the red engine was rusted shut. Vines the size of pythons wrapped around the wheels, pulsing with a bioluminescent red light. Scrimgeour signaled for silence. He cast a sensory charm, a sphere of detection that should have revealed any hidden enemies. The sphere expanded, turned a sickly grey, and then popped. The magic had been eaten. The environment itself was hostile to wizardry. The laws of physics in Hogsmeade were being overwritten by the laws of the dimension that had swallowed the castle. The auras moved into the village. The quaint cottages with their thatched roofs were unrecognizable. The thatch had rotted into a wet sludge that dripped down the walls. The windows were blown out, and the insides of the shops were filled with the thick, web-like growth that characterized the infection. They found the first villagers in the town square. They were not dead, but they were no longer human. The barman from the Hog's Head was pinned to the wall of the post office by sharp protrusions of bone that had grown out of his own ribcage. He was still breathing. His eyes were entirely white. When he saw the auras, he did not ask for help. He opened his mouth and a sound came out that was not a voice. It was a clicking sound, a rapid fire signal. He was a beacon. He was alerting the hive. Scrimgeour shouted the order to attack as the ground beneath them erupted. Demodogs, the foot soldiers of the invader, burst through the cobblestones. These were not the strays that had infiltrated the castle earlier. These were larger, fed on the magical ambient energy of the village. Their skin was armored with chitin that deflected stunning spells. An aura named Dawlish fired a blasting curse. The spell hit a demodog in the shoulder, blowing off a chunk of flesh, but the creature did not stop. It leaped, closing the distance in a second, and tore through Dawlish's shield charm as if it were tissue paper. The battle for Hogsmeade was a massacre. The wizards were fighting a war of attrition against an enemy that did not fear death. Every time an aura fell, the vines on the ground surged forward to drag the body into the shadows. The very earth was hungry. Scrimger realized too late that their magic was acting as a lure. The more energy they expended, the more creatures appeared. The Upside Down was attracted to high concentrations of magical power. It fed on the light. Scrimger ordered a retreat to the Three Broomsticks, hoping to use the flu network to evacuate the survivors. They barricaded the door of the inn. Kingsley Shacklebolt sealed the windows with transfigured steel, but the steel rusted within seconds. The air in the pub was freezing. Scrimger grabbed a handful of flu powder and threw it into the fireplace. He shouted for the atrium of the Ministry of Magic. The flames turned emerald green, then violently shifted to a deep, necrotic purple. The connection opened, but it was not a tunnel. It was a throat. A massive tentacle shot out of the fireplace, grabbing the nearest aura. It pulled him into the fire. He didn't burn. He was sucked into the network. This was the first catastrophic error. The flu network connected every wizarding household and institution in Britain. By forcing the connection open while inside the infected zone, Scrimger had not created an exit. He had created an injection point. The infection that was contained within the Scottish Highlands suddenly had a highway to the rest of the country. Miles away, in London, the fireplaces in the Ministry of Magic exploded, not with fire, but with spores. Thick clouds of toxic dust poured into the atrium. The golden statue of the wizard and the centaur was instantly covered in black slime. Employees screamed as vines shot out of the hearths, lashing out indiscriminately. The invasion had bypassed all geographical defenses. It was no longer a local siege. It was a national plague. Inside the room of requirement, the situation was deteriorating. The sanctuary was holding, but the strain on the room's magic was palpable. The ceiling, which usually adjusted to provide sunlight or starlight to keep the students calm, had turned a flat, oppressive grey. The food that the room provided was becoming bland and ash-like. The water tasted metallic. Dumbledore lay on a cot in the centre of the room. His breathing was shallow. The black curse on his hand had spread to his shoulder. The flesh looked like charred wood. Madame Pumphrey was changing the bandages, her hands shaking. There was nothing she could do. This was not a curse that could be lifted. It was a biological conversion. Dumbledore was not just dying. He was becoming compatible with the new world. Harry Potter sat by the headmaster's side. Harry looked exhausted. Dark circles rimmed his eyes. He had not slept because every time he closed his eyes, he was in the mind of the enemy. He saw what Vecna saw. He had watched the massacre in Hogsmeade through the eyes of a demodog. He had felt the satisfaction of the kill. It made him sick to his stomach. He told Dumbledore about the flu network. He told him that the sickness had spread to London. Dumbledore opened his eyes. The blue iris was fading, replaced by a milky white film. He whispered that they had underestimated the enemy's understanding of their world. Vecna was not just a brute. He was a scholar. He had studied their infrastructure. He was using their own conveniences against them. Dumbledore gripped Harry's wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. He told Harry that the castle still had a voice. The founders had buried a failsafe deep within the architecture, a way to sever the castle from the ley lines of the earth to prevent a magical catastrophic event. If they could activate it, they could cut off the energy supply that the Upside Down was feeding on. It wouldn't stop the monsters, but it would stop the terraforming process. It would stop the spread. But the fail-safe was not in the room of requirement. It was in the Chamber of Secrets. The room went silent as Harry relayed the plan. The Chamber of Secrets was miles below them, deep in the bedrock. To get there, they would have to traverse the entire infected castle. They would have to go down into the dark where the air was thickest with spores, down where the basilisk skeleton lay, down where the enemy's roots were likely the strongest. Hermione was the one to speak first. She pointed out that they couldn't take everyone. It had to be a small team, quiet, fast. No heavy magic that would attract the hive. They needed stealth. Ron volunteered immediately. He looked at his broken wand, then at the pile of weapons the students had scavenged. He picked up a heavy silver sword that belonged to a suit of armor. He said he didn't need magic to swing a blade. Ginny Weasley stepped forward, her face set in stone. Luna Lovegood stood up, holding her wand loosely. She said the Nargles were very loud tonight, which meant danger, and she wanted to help. Neville Longbottom stood up. Snape intervened. He stepped out of the shadows, his black robes torn and stained with green ichor. He said he would lead the group. He knew the layout of the dungeons better than anyone. He knew how to mask a magical signature. He looked at Harry with a hatred that had softened into grim resolve. He said that if the boy died, everything was lost. He would not allow the boy to die due to incompetence. They prepared for the descent. They used simple charms to create bubble head spheres around their faces to filter out the spores. They wrapped their boots in cloth to muffle their footsteps. They took only the most essential supplies. Dumbledore gave Harry the Marauder's map, but warned him that the map might lie. The castle was changing. Rooms were moving. The ink on the map was bleeding. The team, Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Luna, Neville, and Snape, stood at the door of the Room of Requirement. Dumbledore lowered the wards just enough to let them out. As the iron door creaked open, the sound of the outside world hit them. It was a low, constant thrumming, like a generator running in a basement. The smell of sulfur and rot was overwhelming. They stepped into the 7th floor corridor. The door slammed shut behind them, sealing the sanctuary once more. They were in the belly of the beast. The stone walls of Hogwarts were covered in a layer of biological resin. It was sticky and translucent. Underneath the resin, they could see the stone moving, expanding and contracting, as if the castle were breathing. The portraits were gone. The canvas remained, but the people inside had been erased or transformed into screaming shapes that begged for death. They moved slowly. Snape took point. He used a non-verbal spell to dim the light of their wands to the bare minimum. They descended the grand staircase. The stairs were no longer floating. They were held together by thick webs. The gap in the center of the stairwell, usually a clear drop to the ground floor, was filled with a red fog. Shapes moved in the fog, large shapes. On the 3rd floor, they encountered the first major obstacle. The corridor leading to the stairs was blocked by a nest. It was a cluster of eggs, each the size of a quaffle, pulsing with a wet light. They were attached to the walls and the ceiling. Inside the eggs, things were writhing. Snape signaled for a halt. He gestured for them to move around the nest, hugging the wall. Neville stepped on a loose flagstone. It clicked. The sound was tiny, but in the silence it was like a gunshot. The eggs stopped pulsing. They all turned a dark, angry red. Then they burst open. Small creatures, the size of cats but with the anatomy of spiders and human hands, scuttled out. They screeched. It was a nursery. The mother was close. From the ceiling, a monstrosity dropped down. It was Aragog, the king of the Acromantulas. But Aragog had died years ago. This was his corpse, reanimated and mutated by the Mind Flayer. The spider was massive, its legs spanning the width of the hall. Its eyes were gone, replaced by glowing red rifts. Its chelicerae dripped with acidic sludge. It did not speak as Aragog once did. It only hissed. Snape didn't hesitate. He slashed his wand through the air, casting a dark cutting curse, Sectum Sempra. The spell hit the spider's face, carving deep gashes into the chitin. Black blood sprayed. The spider roared and charged. "Run!" Snape shouted. The students sprinted toward the stairs. Harry cast a blasting curse over his shoulder. The explosion knocked the smaller spiders back, but the giant carcass of Aragog was fast. It scrambled along the walls, ignoring gravity. It was herding them. It was driving them toward the landing. They reached the marble staircase. It was damaged. Large sections missing. They had to jump across gaps where the stone had crumbled away. Ron slipped. His hand caught the edge of a step. He dangled over the abyss. Below him, in the red fog, the dimmer dogs were waiting. They looked up, their petal mouths opening in anticipation. Hermione grabbed Ron's wrist. She pulled with all her strength. "Don't look down," she screamed. She hauled him up just as a stream of webbing shot from the darkness, missing his boot by an inch. They kept running. They reached the second-floor girls' bathroom, the entrance to the chamber, but the bathroom was flooded. The water was black and oily. Moaning Myrtle was there, but she was not floating. She was stuck in the water, her ghostly form tangled in the sludge. She was weeping black tears. When she saw Harry, she screamed for him to leave. She said he was down there. She said the snake was awake, but it wasn't a snake anymore. Harry ran to the sink with the copper tap in the shape of a snake. He spoke in Parseltongue. "Open." The word felt like gravel in his throat. The sink did not slide open smoothly. It cracked. The mechanism ground against the stone. The pipes burst, spraying steam. Slowly, the sink descended, revealing the large pipe that led down into the dark. Snape looked at the students. "I will hold the door," he said. He turned back to face the corridor. The sound of Aragog's legs clicking against the stone was getting louder. "No," Harry said. "We need you." "You need time," Snape corrected. "The spider is not alone. I can feel them. The shadows are full of them. Go." "That is an order, Potter." Harry looked at the man he had hated for 6 years. He saw no fear in Snape's face, only a cold calculation. Snape was offering himself as a pawn to save the king. It was the most logical move. It was the only move. Harry nodded. He jumped into the pipe. Ron followed. Then Hermione, Ginny, Luna, and Neville. As Neville slid down, he looked back. He saw Snape standing tall, his black robes billowing in the draught. The giant spider burst into the room, followed by a swarm of smaller horrors. Snape raised his wand. He did not cast a shield. He cast fire, fiend fire, a cursed flame that consumed everything. The fire took the shape of a giant serpent. It struck the spider. The room was engulfed in screaming orange light. Then Neville was sliding down into the dark, and the light above vanished. They landed on the pile of small animal bones in the chamber's antechamber. The bones were crunching under their feet. The air down here was different. It was hot. It smelled of ozone and burning meat. The spores were so thick they were like a fog. The bubblehead charms were flickering, struggling to filter the toxins. They walked through the main tunnel. The giant shedding of the basilisk's skin was still there, but it had calcified. It looked like a tunnel of bone. They reached the massive round door with the snakes. The snakes were moving. They were real snakes now, fused into the metal. They bit at each other, locked in an eternal cycle of cannibalism. Harry hissed the command again. The snakes uncoiled. The door swung open. The Chamber of Secrets was vast. Usually, it was a dark, wet cavern with the statue of Salazar Slytherin at the far end. Now, it was a cathedral of the Upside Down. The water on either side of the walkway was glowing red, and in the center, where the basilisk had once lived, there was a rift. It was a tear in reality, a vertical wound in the air that glowed with a blinding crimson light. This was the heart of the infection. This was where Vecna had punched through, and standing in front of the rift was not a monster. It was a person. It was a girl. She was wearing Ravenclaw robes. Her back was to them. She was floating a few feet off the ground. Her arms were outstretched toward the rift. "Cho," Harry whispered. The girl turned around. It was Cho Chang, but her eyes were gone. Her sockets were filled with the same red light as the rift. Her skin was translucent, showing the black veins pumping beneath. "Harry," she said. Her voice was layered, echoing with the deep rasp of Vecna. "We have been waiting for you. The architect wants to show you the future." Cho raised her hand. The water in the pool exploded. Rising from the depths was not the basilisk. The basilisk was dead. Its bones lay scattered. Rising from the water was a construct made of bone and shadow. It looked like a giant spinal column with a skull that resembled the Dark Mark, but twisted. It was a psychic amplifier. "The failsafe is gone," the voice that used Cho's mouth said. "We found it. We ate it. There is no off switch, Harry. There is only the merge." Harry realized Dumbledore had been wrong. The enemy knew their history better than they did. Vecna had accessed the minds of the ghosts, the portraits, the teachers. He knew about the chamber. He had baited them. He had drawn the strongest students and the chosen one away from the protection of the room of requirement. Above them, miles away, the room of requirement was under attack. Without Snape, without the strongest fighters, the defense was weaker. And here, in the dark, they were trapped. Cho smiled, a terrible stretching of skin. "Join us," she said. "The pain stops when you let go." Ron roared and charged. He swung the silver sword. Cho didn't move. She flicked her finger. Ron was lifted into the air and slammed against the stone wall. He crumpled, unconscious. Hermione screamed and fired a stunning spell. The red jet of light hit Cho and dissipated like water on a hot pan. Cho laughed. Harry grabbed his head. The vision hit him hard. He wasn't in the chamber anymore. He was in the sky. He was looking down at Earth. He saw the red storm spreading from Hogwarts, spreading from London, covering Europe. He saw the lights of civilization going out one by one. He saw the Muggle armies trying to fight the vines with tanks and missiles, but the machines just stopped working. He saw the end of the human race. "It is inevitable," Vecna's voice whispered in his ear. "Your world is broken. I am bringing order. I am bringing peace." Harry fell to his knees. The despair was a physical weight. It crushed his lungs. Why fight? Snape was dead. Dumbledore was dying. The Ministry had fallen. The world was ending. Then he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Luna. She wasn't looking at Cho. She was looking at the rift. "The Nargles are confused," she said dreamily. "They don't know which way is up. That means the gravity is inverted inside the tear." "Luna, what?" Harry gasped. "If the gravity is inverted," Luna said, pulling a small, strange object from her pocket, a crystal she had likely found in the forest, "then if we throw something in, it shouldn't fall. It should fly." She threw the crystal at the rift. It didn't fall. It shot upward with incredible speed, vanishing into the red light. "It's a vacuum," Hermione realized, her voice shaking. "It's sucking everything in. That's how he's sustaining the bridge. He's pulling our reality into his. So we clog it," Neville said. He looked at the massive stone statue of Salazar Slytherin towering above them. "We plug the drain." Harry looked at the statue. It was hundreds of feet tall. It was solid stone. "How?" Hermione pointed her wand at the base of the statue. "Bombarda Maxima," she whispered. "All of us. On 3. They ignored Cho. They ignored the monsters rising from the water. They aimed their wands at the feet of the founder of Slytherin House. 1, 2, 3. 4 jets of light hit the stone. The explosion was deafening. The base of the statue cracked. The giant stone figure groaned. It began to tilt. It fell forward, straight toward the rift. Cho screamed. She tried to stop it with her mind, but the statue was too heavy. It was ancient magic and dead weight. The head of Salazar Slytherin crashed into the red tear. The impact shook the earth. The statue didn't stop. It was sucked into the vacuum. The rift choked. The red light flickered. The vacuum seal was broken. The connection faltered. A shockwave of energy blasted outward from the rift. It knocked Harry and the others flat. The red glow dimmed. The rift didn't close, but it shrank. It became unstable. The psychic pressure in Harry's head eased. The connection was damaged. Cho fell to the ground. The strings cut. She lay still. The chamber was collapsing. Rocks fell from the ceiling. "We have to go," Hermione yelled, dragging Ron up. They ran back to the pipe, but the pipe was blocked by rubble. They were trapped in the collapsing chamber. Suddenly, a flame burst in the air above them. It was not a cursed fire. It was a golden fire. Fawkes the Phoenix appeared. He looked ragged, half-plucked, but his eyes were bright. He carried the sorting hat in his talons. He swooped down and dropped the hat into Harry's hands. Then he grabbed Harry's shoulder with his talons. He grabbed Hermione. Hermione grabbed Ron. Neville grabbed Luna and Ginny. It was an impossible chain, too heavy for one bird. But Fawkes cried out, a song of pure defiance that cut through the gloom. He flapped his wings. They lifted off the ground. They flew up through the shaft, past the dead pipes, past the ruins of the bathroom. They burst out into the corridor. The fire below had burned out. Snape was gone. Only scorch marks remained. Fawkes did not stop. He flew them up through the crumbling castle, dodging falling debris and reaching vines. He flew them all the way to the 7th floor. They crashed onto the floor in front of the room of requirement. The door was dented. Deep claw marks scarred the iron. The students inside were screaming. Harry banged on the door. "Let us in." The door opened. They fell inside. The sanctuary was in chaos. The lights were out. Dumbledore was slumped on the floor, unconscious. The students were huddled in a tight circle, wands out, pointing at the shadows. Harry looked at the group. They were alive. They had hurt the enemy. They had bought time. But outside, the sky was still red. The rift was damaged, but the infection was already here. And now, Vecna knew exactly who they were. He knew their faces. He knew their fears. The first battle was over. The war of attrition had begun, and the world outside was silent. 3 weeks after the fall of the Chamber of Secrets, the world had stopped ending and had simply begun to die. The initial violent expansion of the rift had slowed, but the atmospheric consequences were global. A belt of grey particulate matter, a mixture of volcanic ash and upside-down spores, now circled the equator of the Earth. It blocked 70% of sunlight. Temperatures plummeted. In London, the Thames froze over, not with clear ice, but with a sludge of black oil and frozen biological debris. The Statute of Secrecy, the oldest and most sacred law of the wizarding world, was not repealed. It was incinerated. Muggle governments had attempted to contain the anomaly in Scotland. The British Prime Minister, acting on desperate intelligence from the few surviving liaisons of the Ministry of Magic, authorized a tactical airstrike on the coordinates of Hogwarts. 2 Eurofighter Typhoons dropped laser-guided bombs onto the castle grounds. The bombs did not detonate. As they entered the red fog zone, the chemical explosives were transmuted into swarms of bats. The kinetic energy of the impact was absorbed by the shield of organic matter covering the castle and fed back into the rift. The pilots lost consciousness instantly as the psychic scream of the hive mind hit them at 30,000 feet. Their planes crashed into the North Sea. The message was clear. Conventional force fed the beast. Inside the room of requirement, the air was recycled and stale. The room had stopped trying to be a cathedral. It had shrunk, becoming a dense, tiered bunker of stone and iron. It was a refugee camp of 300 souls. The house divisions were gone, replaced by functional roles. There were scavengers, healers, guards, and sleepers. The sleepers were the worst off. These were the students who had succumbed to the psychic pressure. They lay in rows on conjured cots, their eyes open, staring at nothing, muttering in unison whenever the clock in the distance chimed. They were human antennae, receiving the signal of the mind flayer. Harry Potter sat at a heavy wooden table in the center of the command area. He was cleaning his glasses, but the smudge wouldn't go away, because the smudge was in his vision, not on the lens. The scar on his forehead was an open wound that refused to scab. It bled a thin trickle of dark fluid whenever Vecna focused his attention on the castle. Harry had not slept more than 2 hours at a time in 21 days. Across the table, the leadership council was arguing. It was a fracture line that had been widening for days. On one side was Hermione Granger and Minerva McGonagall. They argued for preservation, for defensive warding, and for finding a way to cleanse the infection. They were the old guard, holding on to the principles of the light. On the other side stood Draco Malfoy and, surprisingly, Ginny Weasley. They looked different. Draco had cut his hair short and wore a vest of dragonhide armor scavenged from the dungeons. Ginny looked hollowed out, her eyes hard and cold. She had been possessed by Tom Riddle once. She knew what it felt like to have a voice in her head. She was the only one who seemed immune to the fear of the psychic intrusion, because she had already lived it. Draco slammed a book onto the table. It was not a textbook. It was a tome of dark arts, secrets of the darkest art. Hermione recoiled as if the book were radioactive. Draco pointed at a diagram of a blood ward. He spoke with a jagged intensity. He said that standard Protego charms were useless. The enemy did not attack with magic. It attacked with biology and entropy. The only thing that slowed the vines down was necrosis, death energy. He proposed sacrificing the magical creatures they had saved, the hippogriffs, the thestrals, to fuel a sacrificial ward around the room. He called it a calorie exchange, a life for a shield. Hermione was appalled. She argued that using dark magic corrupted the soul, and that if they started sacrificing living beings, they were no better than the Death Eaters. She said they had to maintain their humanity, or there was nothing left to save. Ginny interrupted her. Her voice was flat. She asked Hermione what humanity was worth when they were being digested. She pointed to the corner where a first-year Hufflepuff was screaming, strapped to a bed, as black veins raced up his neck. Ginny sided with Draco. She said that Vecna was a predator. You don't debate a predator. You poison the meat. She argued that they needed to weaponize the infection against itself. Harry looked between them. He was the tiebreaker. He was the chosen one. But he felt like a ghost. He looked at Dumbledore. The headmaster was still in a magically induced coma in a private alcove. The infection had taken his arm and half his chest. He was alive only because Fawkes was roosting on his chest, crying tears onto the wounds every hour. It was a stalemate of life and death. Without Dumbledore, Harry was the symbol. Harry looked at Draco. He hated the idea. It made him sick. But he looked at the map of the castle. They controlled one room. Vecna controlled everything else. They were starving. The Room of Requirement could not create food, only summon it from what was available, and the castle's kitchens were in the infected zone. They had been eating dry rations for weeks. They were weak. Harry made a decision. He did not agree to the blood sacrifice of the creatures, but he agreed to the escalation. He authorized a raid, not for food, but for power. He looked at the map, the restricted section of the library. If they couldn't use blood magic, they needed information on dimensional sealing that was forbidden in standard texts. They needed to know how to kill a god. The mission was set. A strike team would leave the room. Harry, Draco, Ginny, and Blaise Zabini. A mixed house team. The ideological fracture was temporarily bridged by necessity, but the tension remained. As they geared up, Ron took Harry aside. Ron looked different too. He had stopped shaving. He carried a goblin-wrought axe he had found. He told Harry to watch his back. He didn't trust Malfoy. He said that Malfoy was making sense, and that was what scared him the most. When the bad guys start making sense, the good guys are in trouble. They exited the Room of Requirement into the 7th floor corridor. The silence was heavy. The castle had changed again. It was no longer just covered in vines. It was transforming. The stone walls were becoming translucent, like amber. Inside the walls, you could see the nervous system of the castle, glowing red threads that pulsed. The air was freezing. They moved toward the library. They did not use light spells. They used thermal goggles that Hermione had enchanted from Muggle schematics. The corridors were full of floating spores. They had to move through them without disturbing the air currents. They reached the library doors. They were fused shut with resin. Draco stepped forward. He didn't use an unlocking charm. He pulled a vial from his belt. It contained a corrosive acid derived from the venom of the demodogs they had killed. He poured it on the hinges. The resin hissed and melted. They slipped inside. The library was a graveyard. The books were rotting on the shelves. But the worst part was the sound. A low, scratching sound coming from the restricted section. They crept forward. In the center of the restricted section, sitting at a reading desk, was a figure. It was Madame Pince, the librarian. But her head was gone. In its place was a blooming flower of flesh, similar to the demodogs. Her hands were still moving. She was organizing books. She was stacking them in piles, not by subject, but by texture. She was flaying the books, ripping the leather covers off and stitching them together with a bone needle. She was making a skin. Harry signaled for silence. They needed to get past her to the high-security cages at the back. Blaise Zabini stepped on a patch of loose parchment. It crinkled. Madame Pince stopped. The flower head turned. A shriek erupted from the fleshy petals. It was a sonic blast. The shelves exploded. Books flew into the air, turning into birds with razor-sharp pages. The text flew off the paper and formed chains in the air, wrapping around Harry's throat. The knowledge itself was attacking them. Draco reacted instantly. He cast a blasting curse, not at the monster, but at the ceiling. He brought a heavy chandelier crashing down on the creature. It pinned the Pince thing to the floor. "Grab the books," Harry yelled. They ran to the cages. Ginny used a dark cutting curse to slice through the iron bars. They grabbed armfuls of black-bound tomes, ancient books on demonology, void spaces, and soul anchors. As they turned to leave, the shadows in the corner of the library deepened. The air grew colder, surpassing the chill of the Dementors. A figure stepped out of the darkness. It was not a monster. It was a man. He was tall, pale, and skeletal. He wore black robes that were pristine, untouched by the filth of the castle. His eyes were red, But they were not the flat red of the infection. They were the burning red of hate. He held a wand that looked like a bone. It was Voldemort. The strike team froze. They were trapped between the infection and the Dark Lord. Voldemort did not look at them. He looked at the library. He looked at the desecration of the magical knowledge. He looked at the pince things struggling under the chandelier. He sneered. It was a look of absolute disgust. "Filth," Voldemort whispered. He flicked his wand. The pince thing didn't just die. It unraveled. The magic reversed its biology until it was nothing but a pile of dust. Harry raised his wand. "Tom," he said. Voldemort turned his eyes to Harry. There was no joy in his face. No triumph. "Potter," he said, "you have allowed my kingdom to rot." "It's not your kingdom anymore," Harry said, his voice shaking. "Is it not?" Voldemort glided forward. I felt the shift. I felt the intruder. A parasite from a lower dimension. He thinks he can claim what is mine. He thinks pain is power. He is a child playing with a knife. Voldemort was not there to kill Harry. Not yet. He was there because his ego could not allow a rival. Vecna was a usurper. Voldemort was a tyrant, and tyrants do not share. "You are losing," Voldemort stated. "Dumbledore is broken. The Ministry is a tomb. You are hiding in a closet while he eats the world. And you," he looked at Draco, "you reek of fear, boy." Draco stepped forward, his wand raised. "We are surviving." "Survival is for rats," Voldemort hissed. "Wizards conquer." Suddenly, the library shook. The Mind Flayer had sensed the presence of a high-level threat. The windows blew inward. A massive tentacle of smoke and shadow smashed into the room. It swept through the shelves, turning wood to dust. Voldemort did not flinch. He raised his wand. He did not cast a shield. He cast Avada Kedavra. The green light hit the smoke entity. Usually, physical attacks passed through the shadow. But the killing curse was not physical. It was a metaphysical severance. The green light hit the smoke and spread like a virus. The tentacle spasmed. The Mind Flayer screamed, a sound that shook the foundations of Scotland. The shadow limb withered and dissolved. Voldemort had hurt it. He had proved that the infection could be killed by the ultimate dark magic. He turned to Harry. "If you want to save this world, Potter, you will have to break it. The light cannot burn this out. Only the dark can consume the dark." Voldemort dissolved into black smoke and flew out of the broken window, heading straight for the central tower where the rift was strongest. He was going to war, not for humanity, for ownership. Harry and the team scrambled back to the room of requirement. They had the books, but they also had a terrifying realization. The only entity strong enough to fight Vecna was the monster they had spent 6 years trying to destroy. Back in the room, the return of the strike team caused a commotion. They dumped the dark books on the table. Hermione began to read them, desperate for a counter-curse. But as she read, she grew paler. "These aren't spells," she whispered. "They're transactions," she explained. To close a rift of this size, you couldn't just patch it. You had to fill the void, the law of equivalent exchange. The rift was held open by the psychic energy of the hive mind. To collapse it, you needed a burst of psychic energy of equal magnitude. "A soul bomb, a sacrifice," Draco said. "I told you." "Not just a life," Hermione said, tears forming in her eyes. "A soul, a powerful one. Someone has to walk into the rift and detonate their magical core. It will destroy them completely. No ghost, no afterlife, just cessation." The room went silent. This was the cost. Meanwhile, the situation outside escalated. Voldemort's assault on the castle was visible from the astronomy tower windows. Flashes of green light illuminated the red clouds. He had rallied the remaining Death Eaters. Bellatrix Lestrange, Dolohov, the Carrows. They were fighting in the courtyards. It was a surreal battle. Death Eaters casting unforgivable curses against demagogues. Giants fighting the Mind Flayer's constructs. The enemy of my enemy is my enemy, but he is currently busy. Inside the room, the ideological fracture snapped. Seamus Finnegan, terrified by the news that the only solution was a suicide mission, tried to leave. He shouted that they should surrender. He said he could hear the voice in his head promising peace. He said he just wanted to go home. He pulled out his wand and aimed it at the door controls. "Don't open the door, Seamus," Ron warned, raising his axe. "I'm done," Seamus yelled. "I'm listening to him. He says we can sleep." Seamus fired a spell at the door mechanism. The locks began to turn. "Stupefy," Hermione shouted, but her hex missed. Draco didn't use a stunning spell. He used a blasting curse. It hit the floor in front of Seamus, knocking him back. Seamus hit his head on the stone and slumped over. The room erupted. Gryffindors drew wands on Slytherins. People were shouting. The unity was gone. The fear had won. Harry stood on the table. He fired a cannon blast from his wand into the ceiling. The noise silenced everyone. "Enough!" Harry screamed. He looked wild. "We are not fighting each other. Seamus is right. We are tired. We are losing. But we do not open that door until we are ready to end this." He looked at Hermione. "Find the ritual. Figure out how to trigger the core detonation." He looked at Draco. "Get your team. We're going to need that blood magic for the perimeter." He looked at the unconscious Seamus. "Tie him up. No one listens to the voice. If you hear it, you report it. If you hide it, you are a traitor." Harry had crossed a line. He was instituting martial law. He was adopting the tactics of a commander, not a schoolboy. He saw the look in Ginny's eyes. It was approval. He saw the look in Hermione's eyes. It was fear, not of Vecna, but of him. Later that night, the radio crackled to life. It was the only piece of tech that still worked intermittently, modified by the Weasley twins to skip across frequencies. It was Lee Jordan's voice, broadcasting Potterwatch. To anyone still listening, Lee's voice was filled with static. "London is gone. The government has collapsed. The Muggles tried to launch a nuke at the rift an hour ago. The missile didn't make it. The birds caught it. They carried it back to the launch site. Manchester is a crater." A pause. "We are hearing reports of a new movement. People in the countryside. They are walking into the mist. They are calling it the Ascension. They are walking into the mouths of the monsters willingly. They say it's beautiful. Don't listen to them. Stay inside. Stay armed. And Harry, if you can hear this, please tell us there's a plan. Because we are running out of bullets. And the shadows are getting longer." Harry turned off the radio. He sat in the dark. The clock chimed. Bong, bong. He looked at his hand. The back of his hand, where Umbridge had forced him to carve "I must not tell lies," was itching. He looked closely. The scars were changing. The text was rearranging itself. It now read, "I must let go." Harry grabbed a knife and slashed across the words, cutting the skin to break the message. He watched the blood drip onto the floor. It was dark red, almost black. He realized then that he was infected, not physically, but mentally. The connection to Voldemort had left a door open, and Vecna had walked right in. He was the spy. He was the weakness. He understood why Dumbledore had isolated himself, and he knew that he couldn't stay in command much longer. A shift in the balance of power. The heroes were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting a civil war of philosophy. The villains were fighting the monsters. The world was burning, and the Saviour was becoming a liability. From the shadows of the coma ward, a phoenix song began to play. It was low and mournful. Fawkes was singing a dirge. The bird knew what was coming. Dumbledore was waking up, but he wasn't waking up as the man he was. The infection had reached his brain. The greatest wizard of the age opened his eyes, and for the first time in history, Albus Dumbledore's eyes were not blue. They were black. The safeguard had failed. The fortress was breached from the inside. The phoenix did not rise from the ashes. Fawkes gave a final, choked cry that sounded like a dry branch snapping, and then his body disintegrated into a pile of grey dust. The dust did not glow. It did not move. It simply lay on the chest of the man who had been Albus Dumbledore. The silence in the room of requirement was absolute. 300 students held their breath. The air pressure in the room dropped so sharply that ears popped. Dumbledore sat up. The movement was wrong. It was jerky, like a marionette being pulled by an inexperienced puppeteer. He swung his legs off the cot. His robes were tattered, revealing the black rot that had consumed his entire right side. But it was his face that froze the blood in Harry's veins. The kindness was gone. The twinkle was extinguished. The eyes were pools of absolute black, reflecting no light, devoid of any soul. They were windows into the void. Harry stepped forward, his wand lowered. He wanted to speak. He wanted to say the headmaster's name, but the thing on the bed spoke first. It did not use Dumbledore's voice. It used the voice of the hive. 1,000 screams layered over a deep, guttural growl filtered through the vocal cords of the greatest wizard of the age. "You cling to the shell," the entity said. "You patch the cracks, but the chick must break the shell to be born. Why do you tape the shell, Harry?" Harry raised his wand. His hand was shaking. "Professor." "He is gone," the entity said. He was weak. He felt so much guilt. It was delicious, like marrow in a bone. I ate it. I ate his sister. I ate his regrets. Now there is only the purpose. Dumbledore stood. He did not reach for a wand. He did not need one. He raised his blackened hand. The air in the room solidified. It became a crushing weight. Students fell to their knees, gasping. The gravity was increasing. Vecna was using Dumbledore's immense magical core to rewrite the laws of physics inside the sanctuary. "Get back," Harry yelled, fighting to keep his arm up. "Stupefy." The red jet of light hit Dumbledore's chest. It didn't bounce off. It was absorbed. The black flesh drank the magic. Dumbledore smiled. "Magic is just energy," the voice mocked. "I am the hungry dark." Dumbledore swept his hand to the side. A row of beds containing the sleeping students was flung across the room. They smashed into the stone wall. Bones broke. Screams erupted. The sanctuary had become a slaughterhouse. McGonagall screamed in rage. She transfigured the stone floor into a cage of iron spikes, driving them upward to impale the headmaster. Dumbledore didn't move. The spikes turned to dust before they touched his robes. He looked at McGonagall. "Minerva," he whispered, "you are so tired. Sleep." He pointed a finger. McGonagall's eyes rolled back. She collapsed, her mind instantly overwhelmed by a psychic hammer blow. She wasn't dead, but she was gone, trapped in a nightmare loop. The panic was total. Students were scrambling for the door, but the door was sealed by the pressure. They were trapped with a god in a human suit. Harry realized he had made a mistake. A fatal, sentimental mistake. He had hoped Dumbledore could be saved. He had waited, and because he waited, the wolf was in the fold. He looked at Ron and Hermione. They were pinned to the floor by the gravity. "Kill him!" a voice shrieked. It was Ginny. She was struggling to stand, blood running from her nose. "Harry, kill him. It's not him." Harry aimed his wand. The killing curse, the words hovered on his lips. Avada Kedavra. He had to say it. He had to mean it. He looked at the face of the man who had given him a home. The man had saved him. He saw the beard, the half-moon spectacles that were now cracked. He couldn't do it. His soul rebelled. The hesitation lasted only a second. In that second, Dumbledore raised both hands. He began to pull. The walls of the room of requirement groaned. The magic that created the room, the ancient sentient magic of Hogwarts, was being ripped apart. Dumbledore was cannibalizing the room. He was tearing the sanctuary down to feed the rift. "I will open the sky," Dumbledore roared. A beam of green light cut through the room. It did not come from Harry. It came from the side, from the shadows. It hit Dumbledore square in the chest. The impact was silent. The body of the headmaster jerked backward. The black eyes went wide. The connection was severed. The body fell to the floor with a heavy thud. Harry turned. Draco Malfoy stood there. His wand was still raised. His face was a mask of weeping terror, but his hand was steady. He had done what the Chosen One could not. He had committed the ultimate sin to save them. The gravity lifted instantly. The air rushed back into the room. But the damage was done. The anchor was broken. The room of requirement shuddered. The ceiling began to dissolve. The illusion of safety evaporated. The stone walls melted away, revealing the true location. The 7th floor corridor. And the corridor was full of them. Hundreds of demodogs were waiting. They clung to the ceiling. They covered the floor. They were watching the door fade away. The barrier was gone. "Run!" Harry screamed. It was not a retreat. It was a rout. The students broke. They ran in every direction. The demodogs pounced. The slaughter was immediate and chaotic. The screams of students mixed with the wet tearing of flesh. Harry grabbed Hermione and Ron. "The stairs! Go for the stairs!" They fought their way through the mass of bodies. Spells flew wildly. Confringo, Reducto, Incendio. Flashes of light illuminated the horror. A third-year Hufflepuff was dragged into the ceiling by a vine. A group of Slytherins stood back to back, blasting fire into the swarm until the floor beneath them gave way and they fell into the dark. Draco was standing over Dumbledore's body. He was staring at what he had done. He wasn't moving. A demodog lunged at him from the side. "Draco!" Harry yelled. Harry fired a banishing charm. It hit the dog in mid-air, knocking it into the wall. He ran to Draco and grabbed his collar. "Move! He's dead! You can't help him!" Draco looked at Harry. "I killed him." "You saved us." Harry lied. He didn't know if it was a lie. He pulled Draco up. They ran. The group. Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Neville, Luna, and a shell-shocked Draco sprinted toward the grand staircase. But the staircase was gone. The central void of the castle was now a vertical wind tunnel. Red lightning arced up and down the shaft. The floating stairs had been pulverized. "Where do we go?" Ron yelled over the noise of the dying castle. "The viaduct," Hermione shouted. "If we can get to the bridge, we can blow it, isolate the main keep." It was a desperate plan. The viaduct bridge connected the courtyard to the landscape beyond. If they destroyed it, they would be trapped on a floating island of rock, but the main swarm might be cut off. They ran down the side corridors, taking the service stairs that the house elves used. These narrow passages were less infested. They scrambled down floor after floor. The castle was shaking violently. The integration with the Upside Down was accelerating. The walls were pulsing like a living heart. They reached the entrance hall. It was unrecognizable. The massive oak doors were gone. The courtyard outside was a battlefield. But it wasn't the monsters they saw first. It was the flashes of green light. Voldemort was there. He was making his last stand. The Dark Lord stood in the center of the courtyard. He was surrounded by a circle of black fire. He was not fighting alone. The remaining Death Eaters, Bellatrix, Lucius Malfoy, Dolohov, were fighting back to back with him. But they were losing. The Mind Flayer had fully materialized. It was a towering storm of shadow that blocked out the red sky. It was hammering against Voldemort's shield. Voldemort looked exhausted. His skin was grey. He was holding the Elder Wand. He had taken it from Dumbledore's tomb days ago, Harry realized. But the wand was resisting him. It knew its true master was nearby. Harry and his group burst into the courtyard. They stopped. To get to the bridge, they had to cross the killing field. Voldemort saw them. His red eyes locked onto Harry. He didn't cast a curse. He lowered the shield for a fraction of a second. "Potter!" Voldemort shouted. His voice was thin, strained. "The shield. Cast the shield." He was asking for help. The enemy of the world was asking the boy to hold the line. Harry made a choice, a small choice. He could have run. He could have used the distraction to slip past. But if Voldemort fell right now, the Mind Flayer would turn instantly on them. They needed a meat shield. "Protego Maxima," Harry yelled. He pointed his wand at the sky. Hermione joined him. Then Ron. Then Draco. Then Ginny. A massive dome of blue light erupted from their wands. It merged with Voldemort's black fire. The combined magic of the light and the dark created a barrier of shimmering grey energy. The Mind Flayer's tendrils smashed against it and burned. Voldemort looked at Harry. For the first time, there was no sneer. There was a calculation. "The bridge," Voldemort hissed. "Go to the bridge. I will hold the beast." It was a command, but it was also a sacrifice. Voldemort was buying them time, not out of love, but out of strategy. He knew he couldn't win this alone. He needed the bomb. He knew what they were planning. He had seen the books in the library. "Go!" Voldemort roared. He raised the Elder Wand and unleashed a wave of fiend fire that took the shape of a hydra. The fire consumed a wave of demodogs. Harry didn't say thank you. He ran. They sprinted across the cobblestones, dodging stray curses and falling debris. They reached the entrance to the viaduct bridge. The bridge was a long, narrow strip of stone stretching out over the abyss. Below, the mist was endless. They ran onto the bridge. Halfway across, Harry stopped. "We have to blow it now," he said. "We're not on the other side yet," Ron argued. "There is no other side." Harry pointed. The other side of the bridge, the mountains, the path to Hogsmeade, was gone. The land had fallen away. The bridge ended in mid-air. They were running toward a cliff edge. The castle was floating. The chunk of earth Hogwarts sat on had been lifted into the sky by the gravity distortion. They were trapped. "Back!" Harry yelled. "Back to the courtyard." But the courtyard was gone. The Mind Flayer had broken through. Voldemort was down. The giant shadow entity had crushed the black fire. Voldemort was on his knees, holding the Elder Wand up with a shaking hand. A massive tentacle slammed into him, driving him into the ground. The bridge was the only thing left, and the monsters were pouring onto it. "We're cornered," Neville said. His voice was calm. He gripped his wand. "I'm not going back to the playful torture. I'm fighting here." They formed a line on the bridge, 7 students against an army. Then the small choice happened, the choice that changed the outcome of the war. Hermione looked at the group. She looked at Harry. She touched the beaded bag at her hip. She had the books. She knew the spell. The soul bomb. The resonance cascade that could invert the rift. But the spell required a catalyst. It required a source of immense magical potential. that was currently unstable. She looked at Draco. Draco was holding his wand loosely. He was staring at the abyss. He was broken. He had killed Dumbledore. His soul was fractured. Hermione stepped forward. She didn't speak to Harry. She spoke to Draco. "Draco," she said softly. He looked at her. "You have the allegiance," she whispered. "You killed him. The Elder Wand. The one Voldemort has. It doesn't obey him. It obeys you." Draco blinked. "What?" "Voldemort can't hold the beast because the wand is fighting him," Hermione explained rapidly. "But if you call it, if you take it, you can channel the power. You can be the bomb." "I'll die," Draco said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Hermione said, "but you'll clear the ledger." It was a cruel thing to say. It was a manipulative thing to say. It was something Dumbledore would have said. Hermione had crossed the line from student to general. She was spending a life to save the board. Draco looked at the swarm of monsters rushing toward the bridge. He looked at Voldemort, who was being crushed. He looked at Harry. "Potter," Draco said, "tell my mother I tried." Draco Malfoy stepped forward. He raised his hand toward the courtyard. He didn't cast a spell. He shouted one word. "Accio." In the courtyard, beneath the crushing weight of the shadow, the Elder Wand vibrated. Voldemort felt it rip from his fingers. He screamed in fury. The wand flew through the air, spinning end over end. It crossed the distance to the bridge. Draco caught it. As his fingers closed around the wood, a shockwave of white light exploded from him. The wand recognized its master. The power was absolute. But Draco did not use it to fight. He used it to ignite. He looked at Hermione. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. She began to chant the incantation from the dark book. "Anima eruptura, totalis." Draco's body began to glow. The cracks in his soul, the trauma of the murder he had just committed, became fissures of light. He was becoming a reactor. "Run back!" Harry realized what was happening. "Get behind me." Harry grabbed his friends and pulled them to the very edge of the broken bridge. He cast the strongest shield charm he could manage. Draco stood alone in the center of the bridge. The monsters were 10 feet away. The Mind Flayer roared, sensing the spike in energy. It turned its massive attention to the boy. Draco smiled. It was a sad, broken smile. "Expecto Patronum," he whispered. But no Patronus came out. Instead, the raw magical energy of the Elder Wand ignited his core. Draco Malfoy detonated. It was not an explosion of fire. It was an explosion of pure white silence. The blast radius expanded instantly. It vaporized the stone of the bridge. It vaporized the Demodogs. It hit the Mind Flayer. The shadow entity shrieked as its physical form was atomized by the sacrificial energy. The white light rushed toward the castle. It hit the courtyard. It hit the rift in the sky. The light blinded everyone. Harry felt the heat sear his face. He felt the bridge beneath him crumble. They were falling. The blast had destroyed the bridge, the courtyard, and the physical manifestation of the Mind Flayer. But it had also knocked the floating island out of the sky. The gravity spell failed. Hogwarts began to fall. Harry fell into the mist. He couldn't see Ron. He couldn't see Hermione. He was tumbling through the cold, grey air. He crashed into something hard, a tree. He grasped at branches. He hit the ground hard, rolling down a muddy slope. He came to a stop in a pile of wet leaves. He gasped for air. He was alive. He looked up. The sky was still red, but the rift was churning. It was wounded. The connection had been disrupted by the soul bomb. But Hogwarts was gone. The castle lay in ruins on the side of the mountain, a mile away. It was a pile of broken stone and burning wood. The survivors were scattered in the forbidden forest. Harry stood up. His leg was broken. He limped forward. He saw a figure leaning against a tree. It was Voldemort. The Dark Lord was missing an arm. The shadow tentacle had torn it off. He was bleeding black ichor. He looked at Harry. He didn't raise a wand. He didn't have one. The boy died well, Voldemort rasped. He sounded human, weak. Harry ignored him. He looked for his friends. They are gone, Potter, Voldemort said. The fall took them, or the forest will. Shut up, Harry said. He gripped his wand. The rift is not closed, Voldemort said, looking at the sky. It is merely stalled. He will return, and we have no wands left that can challenge him. Harry looked at his own wand. It was holly and phoenix feather. It was cracked. All this ended not with a victory, but with a collapse. The board had been flipped. The pieces were scattered. The castle, the symbol of hope, was destroyed. Dumbledore was dead. Draco was dead. The resistance was broken. But the enemy was hurt. For the first time, Vecna had felt pain. Harry looked at the Forbidden Forest. The trees were changing. They were turning into vines. The world was still sick. We don't need wands, Harry said. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out the resurrection stone. He had found it in the snitch earlier, kept it hidden. He turned it over in his hand 3 times. He didn't summon his parents. He summoned an army. The ghosts of Hogwarts rose from the wreckage. Nearly headless Nick, the bloody Baron, the fat friar, and hundreds of others. They were silver and shimmering. They were immune to the physical attacks of the Upside Down. We changed the rules, Harry whispered. Voldemort looked at the ghosts. He began to laugh, a high, cold laugh. Necromancy, Voldemort said. Finally, you learn. Harry Potter and Voldemort standing together in the ruins, leading an army of the dead against the encroaching dark. The hero had fallen. The general had risen. The innocence was gone forever. The alliance between the boy who lived and the Dark Lord was not sealed with a handshake. It was sealed with a shared recognition of the abyss. In the charred remains of the Forbidden Forest, the air was cold enough to crack stone. The army of ghosts that Harry Potter had summoned stood in a silent ring around the survivors. These were not the friendly spirits of the house tables. They were drawn from the resurrection stone's deep memory. They were silver, translucent, and radiated a chill that froze the encroaching black vines into brittle glass. They were the spectral immune system of a dying world. Voldemort stood by a twisted oak tree. He was bleeding black sludge from the stump of his arm, but he did not seem to care. He was watching the ghosts with a hunger that transcended his physical pain. He told Harry that the dead were useful because they had no minds to break. Vecna could not telepathically assort a memory. Harry did not look at him. He was looking at Ron and Hermione, who had crawled out of the brush. They were battered, covered in ash and mud, staring at Harry with a mix of relief and horror. They saw the stone in his hand. They saw the cold light in his eyes. They realized that the Harry who had fallen from the bridge was not the same Harry who had stood up. The plan was formed in minutes. There was no time for debate. The soul bomb had disrupted the rift, but it had not closed it. The tear in the sky was festering, pulsing with a chaotic rhythm. Vecna was wounded, retreating into the psychic architecture of the Upside Down to heal. If he was allowed to recover, he would not return with an invasion. He would simply merge the realities completely. The Earth would become the Upside Down. To stop him, they had to finish the excision. They had to go inside the mind of the enemy and kill the thinker. Hermione argued that it was suicide. She said the resurrection stone could summon the dead, but it could also anchor the living to the afterlife. If Harry walked into the rift holding it, he might never come back. His soul would become just another ghost. Harry told her that coming back was not the priority. Stopping the noise was. He looked at the ruins of the castle up the slope. The epicenter was the Great Hall, or what was left of it. The march up the mountain was a funeral procession. The ghosts led the way. They floated through the trees, their silver forms passing through the thick webs that blocked the path. When a demodog lunged from the shadows, the ghost did not fight with magic. They swarmed it. They passed through its body. The intense entropy of the dead drained the heat from the monster instantly. The beast would freeze mid-leap, its cells rupturing from the sudden drop in temperature, and shatter on the ground. It was a silent, terrifying efficiency. Voldemort walked beside Harry. He lectured him as they walked. He spoke of mental fortresses. He told Harry that Vecna's power was based on trauma. He found the crack in the psyche and pried it open. To survive inside, Harry had to be devoid of trauma. He had to be empty. He had to embrace the occlusion of the void. Harry listened. He didn't hate the voice anymore. He just used it. It was a tool, like the wand or the stone. They reached the perimeter of the castle ruins. The wreckage was massive. Stone towers lay on their sides like fallen giants. The geography had been twisted. The black lake had drained into the sky, the water floating upward in dirty globules. In the center of the devastation, the rift hovered. It was no longer a tear. It was a sphere of red lightning, a malignant sun sitting on the throne of Hogwarts. The survivors formed a defensive ring. Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Luna, and the remaining DA members took their positions behind the wall of ghosts. They were the anchor team. Their job was to keep the physical bodies of Harry and Voldemort safe while their minds traveled. Ron gripped his axe. He looked at Harry. He didn't say good luck. He just nodded. He knew this was the end of the line, one way or another. Harry and Voldemort sat on a flat slab of marble that used to be part of the entrance stairs. They sat cross-legged, facing each other. The ultimate hero and the ultimate villain. Harry held the resurrection stone. Voldemort placed his remaining hand on Harry's forehead, right over the scar. The connection was physical, magical, and psychic. "Do not get lost, Potter," Voldemort whispered. "I will not come looking for you." "Let's go," Harry said. Harry closed his eyes. The world dropped away. The sensation was not like falling. It was like being turned inside out. The cold of the forest vanished, replaced by a humid, sulphurous heat. The silence was replaced by the ticking of a grandfather clock. They opened their eyes. They were standing in the great hall, but it was not the ruined hall. It was the hall as it had been on the night of the breach, but perfect. Too perfect. The candles were frozen in mid-flicker. The food on the tables was plastic and rotting. The ceiling was a mirror reflecting the floor. And in the center of the high table, sitting on Dumbledore's throne, was Vecna. He did not look like the monster they had seen in the visions. He looked like Henry Creel, a calm, orderly man in a white suit. He was drinking tea from a cup made of bone. He looked up as they entered. He smiled. It was a smile of genuine curiosity. "The orphan and the tyrant," Vecna said. His voice echoed from every stone in the wall. "I expected you sooner. I thought you had come before the school fell. You are inefficient." Voldemort stepped forward. In this mental plane, he was whole. His arm was back. His robes were pristine. He looked like the height of his power. "Efficiency is the excuse of the ant," Voldemort sneered. "We are here to evict you." Vecna stood up. The room shifted. The tables turned into hospital beds. The students sitting at them turned into corpses. "You think this is a house you can buy?" Vecna asked. "This is not a location. It is a condition." Your world is broken. I am the glue. Look at what I have done. No more secrecy. No more hiding in alleys. I have brought magic to the light. You have brought rot, Harry said. He stepped forward. He didn't have a wand here. He had his will. You feed on pain. That's not order. That's just hunger. Vecna looked at Harry. And you, Harry, you are full of pain. It is your fuel. You are a battery. Why do you fight me? I can take the memories away. I can make you forget the cupboard. I can make you forget the green light. I don't want to forget, Harry said. My pain is mine. The battle began. It was not fought with spells. It was fought with reality. Vecna raised a hand and the floor turned into a pit of spiders. Harry focused his mind. He remembered flying. He remembered the feeling of wind on his face. The spiders turned into leaves and blew away. Voldemort attacked. He didn't use defense. He projected his own nightmare. He forced Vecna to see death. Not the death of others, but the death of self. The oblivion that Voldemort feared most. He weaponized his own cowardice. He showed Vecna the nothingness. Vecna stumbled. The vision of non-existence shook him. For a moment, the Henry Creel disguise flickered, revealing the burned, scarred lich underneath. You are strong, Vecna admitted, but you are finite. Outside, in the physical world, the situation was collapsing. The hive mind knew its leader was under attack. The storm was over. The rift surged. From the red sphere, a new wave of monsters poured out. These were not dogs. They were humanoids. They were the converted bodies of the students who had been taken in the first week. They still wore their tattered robes. Their faces were covered in the fleshy masks of the Upside Down. Ron Weasley screamed as he recognized a face. It was Colin Creevey, or it had been. The thing raised a wand fused into its hand and fired a killing curse. Shields, Hermione yelled. The ghosts moved to intercept. They absorbed the spells, but the volume of fire was too high. The ghosts were being destabilized. When a ghost took too much magical energy, it didn't die. It dissipated, fading back into the stone. The defensive ring was shrinking. Neville Longbottom stood at the breach in the wall. He was fighting with the sword of Gryffindor, which he had pulled from the Sorting Hat's remains. He was slashing at the vines that tried to drag them out. A massive vine wrapped around his ankle. He hacked at it, but another grabbed his wrist. He was pulled forward. "Luna!" Neville shouted. "Back! Get back!" He was dragged into the mist. There was no heroic speech, just a sudden, violent disappearance. Luna Lovegood stood there, her eyes wide. She didn't scream. She raised her wand and cast a spell that sent a swarm of silver birds after him, but the birds turned to ash as they hit the fog. Neville was gone. Back in the mine lair, the pressure was increasing. Vecna was rewriting the rules faster than Harry could counter them. He turned the air into water. Harry drowned. He choked on fluid. Voldemort slashed the water with a mental blade, turning it to steam. "He is adapting," Voldemort hissed to Harry. "He learns from every parry. We cannot beat him in a duel. He has the home field advantage." "Then we change the field," Harry gasped. Harry looked at the resurrection stone in his mental hand. It was glowing. He realized that Vecna was right about one thing. This place was a condition, and Harry had brought a different condition with him. He had brought the condition of death. True death, not the rotting undeath of the Upside Down, but the final, peaceful silence of the grave. Harry didn't try to fight Vecna with life. He fought him with entropy. He opened the connection to the stone fully. He let the river of the afterlife spill into the mind lair. The room turned grey. The colours leached out. The ticking clock slowed down. The energy that Vecna fed on, The kinetic, hot energy of fear and pain began to cool. Vecna screamed. It was a sound of frustration. "You are killing the host." "Better dead than yours," Harry said. Voldemort watched this. He saw the power Harry was unleashing, the power of the Master of Death, and he made his calculation. Voldemort knew he could not survive this. If Harry won, the world would be saved, but Voldemort would be a prisoner, a war criminal, a remnant. If Vecna won, Voldemort would be a slave. But there was a third option. Voldemort looked at the cracks forming in Vecna's form. The Lich was struggling to hold his reality together against the flood of entropy. His mental defenses were down. Voldemort didn't attack Vecna's body. He attacked his soul. The Dark Lord turned into a cloud of black smoke, the same form he used for flight. But this smoke was dense, heavy with the fragmented pieces of his own mutilated soul. He flew straight at Vecna. "What are you doing?" Vecna roared. He tried to block the smoke with a psychic wall, but the smoke was too amorphous. Voldemort slammed into Vecna. He forced himself down the Lich's throat. He invaded the invader. Harry watched in horror as Vecna's body began to spasm. Two voices screamed from one mouth. "Get out!" Vecna yelled. "Mine!" Voldemort's voice answered from inside. "This power is mine. This world is mine. I will not share it." Voldemort was not trying to destroy Vecna. He was trying to possess him. He was trying to become the new Mind Flayer. It was the ultimate Horcrux. He was turning the hive mind into his own vessel. The psychic backlash was catastrophic. The mind layer began to fracture. The floor fell away. The walls exploded. Harry was thrown backward. He felt the connection breaking. "Harry!" It was Hermione's voice. He was waking up. Harry opened his eyes on the mountainside. He gasped, vomiting black bile. The physical world was screaming. The red sphere of the rift was convulsing. It was changing color. The red was turning green. The sick, killing green of the Avada Kedavra. "He did it," Harry whispered. He took the seat. The monsters on the battlefield stopped. The humanoids, the dogs, the vines, they all froze. They turned their heads toward the rift. The coordination was gone. The song of the hive had changed keys. They were confused. Then they began to fight each other. The demodogs attacked the humanoids. The vines strangled the dogs. The army of the Upside Down was consuming itself. Voldemort was driving the car, and he was driving it off a cliff. He was commanding the destruction of his own new kingdom just to spite the old master. "We have to close it," Hermione yelled. She was shaking Harry. "Whatever is happening, the energy is peaking. It's going to go supernova. If the rift exploded now, with that much magical density, it wouldn't just destroy Scotland. It would crack the tectonic plate." Harry looked at the stone in his hand. It was vibrating. It was the link. As long as the stone existed, the door was propped open. The Hallows were the keys, the wand, the stone, the cloak. They drew attention. They pierced the veil. He looked at the Elder Wand, lying on the ground where Draco had dropped it. It was charred but whole. He looked at his invisibility cloak, wrapped around his arm. He knew what he had to do. He had to break the keys. He grabbed the Elder Wand. He placed it on the marble slab. He took the resurrection stone and placed it on top of the wand. "No," a voice whispered. It was the ghost of Dumbledore, the real Dumbledore. He shimmered into existence near the edge of the circle. "Harry, if you destroy them, you break the bridge to magic itself. The ley lines are tied to these artifacts. You will maim the world." "The world is already maimed," Harry said. His voice was old. "Magic didn't save us, Professor. It just gave us bigger guns." Harry looked at Ron and Hermione. "Get back." He picked up a heavy rock, a simple non-magical rock. He smashed it down on the resurrection stone. The stone did not break easily. It shrieked, a sound of 1,000 souls crying out. The ghosts forming the defensive ring flickered and vanished. They were released. Harry hit it again and again. The stone cracked. A beam of white light shot up into the sky. It hit the green sphere of the rift. The reaction was instantaneous. The green light turned white. The noise stopped. The gravity inverted. Everything that had come from the rift, the vines, the ash, the monsters, was suddenly pulled violently upward. The vacuum was absolute. The debris of the castle, the bodies of the dead, the air itself was sucked into the hole. Harry held onto the rock slab. Ron and Hermione held onto him. They were lifted off the ground, their feet dangling toward the sky. "Hold on!" Harry screamed. High above, inside the rift, a face formed in the white light. It was a fusion of Voldemort and Vecna, a two-faced god of ruin. It screamed one last time, a sound of pure hate, before the event horizon collapsed. The rift imploded. It didn't close with a bang. It closed with a snap, like a book being shut. The sky went black. The stars returned, but they were dim. They looked far away. Gravity returned to normal. Harry, Ron, and Hermione fell to the ground. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the silence of a room where someone has just died. Harry lay on his back. He looked at his hands. They were empty. The stone was dust. The Elder Wand was a splintered stick. The cloak was just cloth. Its enchantment faded to a dull grey. He reached for his own wand. He tried to cast a Lumos. Nothing happened. No light. No spark. He looked at Hermione. She was trying to heal a cut on Ron's arm. She was waving her wand, saying the incantations. Episci, Ferula. Nothing. The wound continued to bleed. The magic hadn't disappeared completely. It was just quiet. It was distant. It was like a radio station that had gone off the air, leaving only static. The great reservoir of power that wizards drew from had been drained to seal the breach. Harry sat up. He looked out over the ruins. The monsters were dead, their bodies dissolving into harmless sludge. The red moss was turning brown and crumbling. The infection was dead. But so was Hogwarts. So was the Ministry. So was the world they knew. Survivors began to stand up. They looked at their wands. They looked at each other. The fear of the monsters was gone, replaced by a new fear. The fear of being ordinary. Harry stood up. He limped over to the edge of the cliff. He looked down at the dark forests of Scotland. The sun was beginning to rise. It was a pale, watery dawn. Voldemort was gone. Trapped in the space between spaces, locked in an eternal struggle with the lich he had consumed. They would feed on each other forever, a hell of their own making. Draco was dead. Neville was gone. Dumbledore was gone. Harry felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Ginny. She looked tired. Her eyes were hard, but clear. She didn't ask if he was okay. She knew he wasn't. "What now?" she asked. Harry looked at the broken stick of the Elder Wand at his feet. He kicked it over the edge of the cliff. He watched it fall until he couldn't see it anymore. "Now," Harry said, his voice raspy in the cold morning air, "we bury the dead, and then we learn how to live without the cheat codes." He turned back to the group. He didn't look like a wizard anymore. He looked like a soldier who had survived the war only to find his home country had been erased from the map. "Let's go," Harry said. He began to walk down the mountain. He didn't use magic to clear the path. He used his hands to move the rocks, one by one. The age of myth was over. The age of men had begun. And in the silence of the new world, the only sound was the crunch of boots on gravel, walking away from the ruin of the dream. The exclusion zone surrounding the Scottish Highlands remains the most heavily guarded border on Earth. 10 years after the event known formally as the Convergence and informally as the Great Silence, the wire fences are still humming. They are not powered by electricity, but by the last dredges of enchantment scraped from the artifacts of a dead era. The ruins of the castle are overgrown, but the moss is grey, and the trees grow in spirals that make the eyes water if stared at for too long. No one goes in. The radiation count is 0, but the psychic toxicity is fatal. To sleep within 10 miles of the zone is to invite nightmares that do not end when you wake up. Harry Potter sits in a diner in London. He is only 27, but his hair is entirely white. He does not carry a wand. Wands are illegal, classified as Class A dangerous munitions, but that is not why he does not carry one. He does not carry one because they are mostly useless. The ambient magical field of the planet was drained to seal the rift. Magic is no longer a rushing river. It is a dry creek bed. A simple levitation charm requires an hour of deep meditation and leaves the caster with a migraine and a nosebleed. The age of miracles is over. The age of consequences has settled in. Harry pays for his coffee with Muggle money. He works as a consultant for a sub-department of MI5 that does not officially exist. They hunt the remnants, the stray demo dogs that survived the purge and adapted to the sewers, the poltergeists that went feral when the ley lines dried up. Harry does not use spells to hunt them. He uses a heavy iron crowbar and incendiary rounds. He has become efficient in a way that would have terrified Dumbledore. He is not a wizard anymore. He is a cleaner. Hermione Granger is a professor of theoretical physics at Oxford. She spends her days trying to explain the mathematics of the breach to a world that wants to believe it was a mass hallucination or a chemical weapon attack. She writes letters to Ron Weasley, who runs a construction company in Devon. He builds bunkers, high walls, deep basements. He doesn't like open skies. They do not see each other often. The shared trauma is not a bridge. It is a chasm. When they do meet, they do not talk about the war. They do not talk about Draco or Neville. They talk about the weather. They talk about how quiet the world is. As Harry steps out of the diner into the London rain, he catches his reflection in the window. The scar on his forehead has not faded. It has changed. It looks like a spiderweb of white lines tracing down his temple. A permanent brand of the connection that almost unmade reality. It does not hurt, but sometimes, when the atmospheric pressure drops and the static on the radio gets too loud, he can feel it vibrating. He can hear a faint, rhythmic ticking, like a grandfather clock in a hallway that no longer exists. He pulls his collar up against the chill. The magic is gone, sacrificed to keep the lock shut. But the lock is holding. Voldemort and Vecna are screaming in the void, consuming each other in an eternal Ouroboros of hate, suspended in the space between universes. It is a grim victory, a cold victory, but it is a victory. Harry puts his hand in his pocket and touches the cold metal of his weapon. He walks into the crowd, an anonymous ghost in a world that has forgotten how to dream. He is not the boy who lived anymore. He is the man who remembers, and for now, that is enough to keep the door closed.